All right, so these are our pedigree notes. If you haven't already, go ahead, go to our classroom, click on classwork, and in Unit 5, you should find pedigree notes and your copy of the Cornell notes to take your notes on. And then you want to make sure to add highlights and a 3 to 5 sentence summary before turning it in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, pedigree charts. So we've talked about Punnett squares and we're tracking different things and how genes are transferred on, and this will lead us to how to draw a pedigree chart. So pedigree charts are used as a family history of a genetic condition. I actually used them when I worked at Stanford when I studied Down syndrome. It was a family that had Down syndrome in every generation that funded that research. They wanted to know more about it and more therapies that could be used for Down syndrome. So you'll hear me refer a lot to that family. Okay, our essential question here is, what is a pedigree and what is it used for? Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to answer that by the end. Okay, so what is a pedigree chart? Well, a pedigree chart shows a record of the family of an individual. So we start with a single individual and we track their family. And they can be used to study the transmission of a hereditary condition, which just means that it seems to have some kind of genetic portion to it, that it is passed through the genes. Okay. And so these are the symbols that we actually use. So we use a squares for all males. If it's a normal male, which means it doesn't have the disease, then it is an open blank square. If the male does have a disease, we fill it in. Females are used with circles. So a normal female that does not have the disease is open, and a female that does have the disease is filled in. And then a marriage is shown by a line between a female and a male. Okay, and so here we have a marriage with 5 children. So we have a marriage here. You can see the line is connecting them. They are not siblings. They're not anything coming from. And then they had 2 daughters. So the line coming down from this marriage shows that connects to these people here, shows that these are their children. And they had 2 daughters and 3 sons. And we always order them from oldest to youngest. So they had a daughter first, then their second born is a son, third is a son, fourth is a son, and then their 5th born was another daughter. Okay, and it shows that the third born son here, third born here, he was 1, 2, 3, and he's a male, so he's their son, is affected by the condition, but the rest of them are all fine. So we can start looking at this to determine the genotypes for whatever condition that we are tracking, and we will do that in our worksheet. Okay, and then we organize pedigree. So this is a pedigree chart of a family showing 20 individuals. So let's look at this one. So this one starts with a couple here, marriage, and they ended up having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. Okay, notice here that these 2 are not connected back to the original couple. That is because they married into the family. They married their children. So they had 1, 2 daughters and 3 sons. Okay, and the second born daughter here is the one afflicted with the disease. So then you can see this daughter got married here and had 1, 2, 3 children. Okay, this son got married and had 1, 2 children. Okay, and then this daughter here got married here but does not have any children, and then this son from here got married and they had 5 children with 2 of them affected. Okay, so you can see this is the original couple. So if we looked at this generation here, these guys up here, okay, would be their great-grandparents, right? So here are their parents, here are their grandparents, and then here are their great-grandparents. Okay, and then you see these children here. These are their parents and these are their grandparents. So we have different generations. So we have, and you'll see that we also order them here by generation. So just like we saw, we have generation 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have the original great-grandparents. They have some great-grandchildren and they have some grandchildren here. Okay, and then we will see that it's in different generations. So we will number them 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so that if you see these numbers, that's what that means. Is this first generation, second, third, and fourth. And you can see that this is a very rare condition because there's only 3 out of 20 that actually are afflicted by the disease that they're tracking here. And so we can tell that maybe that it is definitely probably a recessive trait. That's why we don't see it more often. If you have more filled in than not filled in, that's when we know that it's probably dominant. Okay. All right, an autosomal recessive trait. So this is an example of one of those pedigrees. So this means that the trait is rare, and you can see there's only 2 individuals, so that means it's definitely recessive. And the trait often skips generations. Basically, it's hidden in what we call the heterozygous carriers, which basically means, just like when we talked about albinism, that the capital A, little a is normal, but it still carries the gene. And that's what we would call carriers. And so we would say that some of these are carriers because they don't observe the trait, but they can pass it on genetically. And then the trait affects males and females equally. We have 1 of each. Okay. Another example here is, how about if it's a dominant trait, right? If it's something that shows up. So that means the trait is common in the pedigree. And so you can see those are the purple ones. Okay. And so the trait is found in every single generation. So you can see there's a lot of them afflicted. Actually, I think this one, sorry, not the purple, but the blue are the filled in, okay? And so you can see there's a lot of them that have it. And so this is definitely a dominant trait, and it affects females and males. It does not choose just females or just males, okay? And the affected individuals transmit the trait to half of their children, okay? So you can see we have here, they have a lot of kids in this group. If you look here, this couple, and they've passed it on to at least half of them, okay? And then we can also see that maybe we have something that we would call an X-linked recessive, which means that is linked to our X chromosome. You know, males have XY chromosomes and females have XX chromosomes. And because males have just 1 copy of the X, then we don't get an extra copy of that gene that could possibly mask the trait. And so that's why we would only see it in males. And we don't really talk about Y-linked traits because there's not a lot of genetic information on the Y chromosome except anything that codes to be a male. And so when we see something that only affects males, we know it has to be on the X chromosome, which has the most genetic information over the Y. And then it also is not showing up in the females because the females most likely have that extra X chromosome, which is masking or causing them to be carriers. So the trait is rare, and it skips generations usually. And affected fathers do not pass it on to their sons, okay? Which means that most of the time that X chromosome is usually coming from the mother. And the reason that is because mom doesn't have a Y chromosome. And so the only thing she can pass on to her sons is that X. And so the Y gets passed on from the dad. So that affected X chromosome never goes through, okay? And so it doesn't get passed on to the next generation, okay? But it can show up again in this generation, okay? And so affected fathers do not pass it to their sons, but it skips a generation, and males are more often affected than females, okay? All right. The last one here is, well, this one's pretty interesting to watch. This is an X-linked recessive trait, and it's actually hemophilia in European royalty. So they've actually tracked this through European royalty. You can see Princess Diana and Charles down here. And you can see you have a hemophilic male, and we've got mostly males, right? Okay. And we don't really see any females, but you do see that there's some carriers. So they do, where it's blue with a little purple in there, that would be a carrier. carrier. And there's some that we don't know the genetics of just because they don't have any children, okay? And so we want to make sure that we designate those as question marks. And you'll have some on your worksheet that are going to be question marks as well, okay? But you can see that we have only males are affected and females are carriers. So this would definitely be an X-linked trait. It definitely is recessive because we don't have a lot of them affected, okay? And then we can also see if we watch. Remember, we talked about the affected males don't usually pass it on to their children. So if we find a male that actually has had children, and I don't think there is any on here. I was looking just a minute ago. I don't see any that have passed it on. And so you can see this one came, these males came from this one, Irene Princess here, from the carrier female. So she only has one copy of the hemophilia gene, and the other one is fine. So those would be just carriers. So you can see this is kind of an example, a real example of an X-linked recessive trait. Okay. All right, so now it's time to go ahead and process your notes. You're going to highlight in any important notes, make connections to your notes in the left-hand column, write any questions you may have in the left-hand column, and then use your highlights and connections and questions for your summary. And make sure you write that 3 to 5 sentence summary before you turn it in. If you have any questions, let me know.